This news segment of the Suburban Radio Hour is brought to you by Click Air. Their team of certified technicians and electricians got you covered for all your heating and cooling needs. Click-air.ca, where comfort meets quality.
Good evening, Montreal, for another edition of the Suburban Radio Hour. I'm Beryl Wiseman, Editor-in-Chief, with my colleagues Anthony Bonaparte, Features Editor, Mark Ledbetter, Sports Editor, and Mike Cohen, who give you everything you need to know about entertainment and society news. Big paper this week, important stories for you to know. Major report that we'll be talking with Chelsea St. Pierre on, showing that 600 people died of falls in health institutions. Naturally, we'll be getting community reaction to Anthony Housefather remaining with the Liberals. The city of Montreal is rolling out a responsible landlord policy that should help tenants, particularly in Côte-des-Neiges and DG. And very important story. The Azrieli Clinic for the Neurodivergent launched in Côte Saint-Luc. Read all that and more in the Suburban. Pick it up at nearly 1,000 depots. Main story, and I want to draw your attention to both the story on the judge expanding injunctions against anti-Israel protests to now protect dozens of Jewish institutions, and also our editorial, An Honor is Due. We can't get justice from the courts. And that centers on our special guest. Before I introduce him, he has made a radical change in what Montreal is about since October the 7th. In fact, the day of October the 7th, we have seen vile protests in the streets. This was not about Israel. Israel hadn't entered Gaza yet. There'd been nothing except 1,400 murdered Jews. The protests in the streets have gone from everything from incitement to violence and incitement to hate. These pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas groups, while denying the first Holocaust, planned for the second with their cries of freedom from the river to the sea, which has been banned as a criminal offense in Austria, in Germany, in France. Montreal has done nothing. It's done nothing when these groups attacked schools in Outremont with guns, with Molotov cocktails. They attacked synagogues in Dollard. Montreal has had more violent attacks against Jewish institutions than any other city in North America. No other city has had 7. They've caused disruption. They've assaulted students in universities at Concordia and McGill. They've caused aggression. They've trespassed on private property. They have one so-called Imam, Adil Sharkawi, screamed at a rally in November, "Death to the Zionists and all those who oppose us, death to the infidels." Clear violations of Section 316 and 317 of the Criminal Code. Our mayor, shockingly silent. Most she's ever said is, "It's shocking." Well, shocking is not a condemnation. Police take their marching orders from the political class. The police have made 3 arrests, including somebody named Bara Abu Hamad, who trespassed into Carrefour Laval, pushed a policeman, so he's being brought up on charges. But generally, even March the 4th, which was a critical date, when some 60 pro-Hamas guys blocked the entrance to the Jewish community's main headquarters, not allowing people inside to leave. Police were there. All they were concerned about is separating pro-Israel from pro-Hamas. They did nothing, even in enforcing basic Montreal laws and bylaws against trespass, criminal code violations against assault. Our special guest has changed all that. After March the 4th, Neil Oberman, senior partner in Spiegel Sommer, went to court and started to get injunction after injunction after injunction against these groups. And 5 different judges, and frankly, it's important to note that none of them were Jewish, got it, gave the injunctions quickly, extended them, and have disallowed these groups from being within 50 meters of now 27 institutions, which story you'll read on page 3. It is my great pleasure to introduce a man who's really changing the face of Montreal and finally getting the mayor to speak out, because after he got these injunctions, the mayor finally said, well, we have to respect the courts. Metro Neil Oberman. Neil, it's my pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Beryl.
And great job on everything you're doing. Neil,
we're working hard, and we continue to work hard.
You've been involved in this effort ever since the students were assaulted at Concordia. You served Concordia and McGill with mise en demeure and letters. But I want to concentrate on what you did since March 4th, since the trespass and intimidation at the Federation building, where these pro-Hamas demonstrators would not let people in or out. You decided the injunction was the way to go and went to court. You've been extraordinarily successful 5 times. But what were your feelings at the time when you went for the first one?
This was an unprecedented event that required out-of-the-box thinking in order to address these individuals and groups that do not respect the rule of law, do not want to protect anybody but their ability to spread hate, aggression, and intimidation. So when we were dealt with this particular matter back on March the 4th, the thought process was, we are going to change this up. We are not going to apply the standard metrics of dealing with issues that are generally addressed before the court, and we were going to seek a protective order to make sure that the community was protected from people of aggression and violence so that they could continue using services such as those offered by Federation and other institutions in Montreal. So we decided that it was no longer acceptable to apply old methodologies for new problems.
And indeed, this was historic. This is the first time where injunctive relief has been used to protect a minority community. I'm sure that if it wasn't the Jews, if it was any other minority, the mayor and the police would have acted more quickly, but somehow there is a double standard there. But were you surprised by how understanding the judges were that, as you had told me earlier, it didn't take them long to issue these injunctions? It wasn't like you had to argue for hours. Were you surprised about how the judiciary got it?
No, the judiciary is and should be neutral of political events. The purpose of the judiciary is to uphold the rule of law. When these issues were brought before the court, properly set out in a factual and legal manner, the rule of law applied, and the decision was based on the rule of law. My greatest respect for the law is that it doesn't make distinctions between color and race and religion. It addresses issues that are involved in the community and attempts to find solutions by applying those principles that our society is based on. So I was not surprised by that, but I am surprised that some people still do not accept the principle of the rule of law, do not apply normal methodologies when dealing with peoples in the community, and fail to understand that freedom of speech does not equate to freedom to hate and freedom to call for violence. And I have consistently said since day one, there is no room for hate. There is no protection for hate. You do not get the benefit of the law to spread your hate, violence, and aggression under the guise of the rule of law. That is not what the rule of law is about. That is not what the courts are there for. And that is not why our client took the proceedings. They took it to protect a community that was under siege.
Judge Louis Charette's words were quite dead on, and he was been the last of the 5 judges who extended the injunctions, where he said, there is the existence of urgency, a serious and or irreparable prejudice. These are hard words. These are clear words. There's no ambiguity in the judges, and the other judges had very similar sentiments. They get it.
The aspect of urgency has been the key factor in these injunctions. Urgency is not a question of fact. It's a question of circumstance, meaning rather it's not a question of circumstantial evidence. You look at the entirety of the file and you say to yourself, is it urgent today? Will it be urgent in the future? The spontaneity and the lack of predictability of these hate groups showing up at places basically constantly equals the aspect of urgency, which is well controlled by the 50-meter perimeter that the courts have authorized. So, as I've mentioned, urgency is a function of circumstance and not solely time. The courts fully understand that in this new paradigm of these hate marches and hate speech, that we need to be able to have that perimeter in place. You can't keep running back to court on the eve of a spontaneous hate assembly before an institution or a building, expecting the court to be available. And that is why the court has consistently applied the principles that we've asked for, which is protection, safety, security, and a perimeter to keep people who do not respect the rule of law from going close enough to those institutions, buildings, and structures to put people's safety in peril. And that has been the main preoccupation. Nobody wants to limit legitimate constitutionally protected rights, but there is a distinction between using the law as a sword or a spear and using it as a shield. The community that I represent respects, honors, and promotes diversity and freedom. But they cannot, they will not be intimidated. They will not be harassed. They will not be violated. The March the 4th was the beginning, the middle, and the end of anybody trying to intimidate, harass, and violate my clients' rights, including the community at large. So it is a notice for all those who think that they are empowered by their large masses to come and do the things that they're doing. Rest assured, we will not sleep, we will not yield, we will not compromise when it comes to safety and security.
Neil, let me ask you a last question. Now that following these injunctions, even Mayor Plante has said, well, the courts have spoken, we have to respect the court's decision. Do you have hope that the police will act more proactively, if you like, just on normal things when they see people blocking a private entrance of private property, as they did at Federation, when they see people blocking entrances at McGill University to buildings? Do you have hope that the police will now have the freedom to act and just enforce basic laws against aggression, against trespass, normal stuff? Let's not even deal with freedom of speech and threats and incitement. Just basic laws.
So it's a great question. So here's the answer in very short form. It's not a question of expectation. We demand that all those who are charged with the administration and enforcement of the law do their job, period. The mayor sets policy, the police do the policing. When the policy is so far from the policing, you have to bring it closer together. How did we do that? The injunction. Now the policy is coming closer to the policing, and we expect and demand that the laws of this nation, of this province, of this city, of these cities be enforced. And there is no compromise on that matter. And we are cognizant that the police have a desire to protect the communities at large, and we shall hold them to the highest standard that we can set in a free and democratic society. Rest assured, again, I will repeat for all your listeners, we will not sleep, we will not yield, we do not compromise with haters. This is our mission, this is our goal, and we will be successful.
Neil Oberman, thank you so much for being on with us. Thank you for your work. You've done heroic work, and you've set a new paradigm for Montreal.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. We wish there was a new paradigm in our healthcare systems, but the news seems to get worse and worse. And our Chelsea St. Pierre wrote a very compelling front page piece on a new report that shocking numbers that shows 600 people have died in falls in health institutions, with many more injured. Chelsea, welcome and good to have you with us. How did this information come out?
So there's the annual report that comes out by the Ministère de la Santé et Services Sociaux every year since 2003. So for about the last 20 years, there's an annual report. So this is just their findings for their annual report. And I have to really specify here, Beryl, that this is for public institutions. But I want to throw some numbers at you to make it, to put this all into perspective. So now, these are public institutions. Paul Brunet says that the private...
Yes, you interviewed Brunet, who called them shocking.
He calls these numbers shocking.
And he's been the leading patients' rights advocate in Montreal, if not in Quebec.
Yeah, that's right. And, like he says this raises many, many questions. But I do want to give you this perspective that, we have, over 60% of the private institutions are run, of the public institutions, are run by private companies.
Such as? Well, give me an example of a private institution run by private companies. Of a public institution run by private companies.
So, like CHSLD, for example. So there was a CHSLD in Dorval, like the Heron residence. Right. Which was...
Oh, those kind. Yes, got it. So these numbers only relate to the public institutions, publicly run, and we've known the history of health institutions privately run. As you mentioned, Heron has been considerably worse.
Yeah, so publicly run 100%, Beryl, makes up less than 10% of all of our seniors healthcare institutions in Quebec.
Right.
So we're talking, those numbers within that context. But there was over 200,000 falls recorded, and then there's
200,000.
Recorded. Well, 197, 271 to be very specific.
In 1 year.
In 1 year.
Got it.
And 54% of events requiring life-sustaining interventions, such as intubation, assisted ventilation, so on and so forth. So this is a big problem. So Brunet, in the interview, what I asked was, what is causing all of these falls? Because the issue, really, it's not just the falls. Like in COVID, when we said, people died with COVID, in these institutions, but a lot of them, we later found out in coroner's reports that they died from dehydration, they died from other things, and they also had COVID. So the falls are similar, in this situation. What's causing all the falls? So there's mismanagement of medication, because medication is being administered by people who don't have the certifications to administer the medication, such as PABs, who are given the responsibility that nurses are supposed to be taking care of because of shortage of staff. There's also the beds are too high. They should be lowered, and they're supposed to have mats next to their beds just in case. But again, even falls getting up from beds, that raises many questions issue. Well, why are they getting out of bed on their own if they don't have the capacity to do that?
So there's also a problem with not having enough orderlies for patients that have to get out of bed to walk around, but maybe too weak to do it unaccompanied.
Absolutely. And this has been an issue when we did our investigations during COVID, when it came to light that there was a huge number of problems within the seniors' residences. A pandemic only highlighted those issues, but the people that we interviewed, the families of patients, as well as patients, we conducted over 50 interviews at the Suburban, collectively or more, and we discovered that many of these problems were existent long before COVID hit. So it's the same. We're back there again.
It goes back to the problem of personnel, labor, oversight, and it's back to that time when we didn't. We had to raise salaries for people to come into the system.
You hit it right on the nose,
and work.
Yeah.
I know you're going to follow up this story with others, and I thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Suburban Radio Hour on CJD. I'm Beryl Wiseman, editor-in-chief of the Suburban. Coming up next, I'll chat with my good friend, our features editor, Anthony Bonaparte. But first, we're off to the CJD Traffic Center.
This news segment of the Suburban Radio Hour is brought to you by Click Air. Their team of certified technicians and electricians got you covered for all your heating and cooling needs. Click-air.ca, where comfort meets quality.